Today we're going to be showing you how to build homemade multi-BB shells for Airsoft CO2 revolvers. These work by taking the extraordinary power of the CO2 revolvers and distributing them across multiple BBs per trigger pull, giving you both a shotgun spread and reducing the power to within field safe limits. These are compatible with a number of revolvers on the market, including the Dan Wessons and also the older Winguns and the Umarex or Wagon Single Action Army. To build these, you're going to need unprimed 357 Magnum brass, a 4.5mm drill bit and some means to drill with it, 4mm inner diameter, 1mm thickness O-rings, superglue, and lastly, 6mm inner diameter, 8mm outer diameter nylon tubing, and some way to cut it accurately to a specific length. First, the brass. As you can see, this 357 Magnum brass is unprimed. Now, if you just want to shoot one BB at a time, you can leave the brass as is, and that small hole in the primer pocket will make this function very similar to a powered down shell. But if you want the full 6 BBs per trigger pull shotgun spread, we're going to need to bore that out to maximize gas flow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chuck up a 4.5mm bit on my drill press. You can use a handheld drill as well, it doesn't matter, just as long as you can get through this soft brass. And I'm going to just bore straight through that. To hold the brass, I'm using just an ordinary pair of pliers. As you can see though, I've wrapped the jaws with electrical tape to prevent it from marring the brass. Now this is going to produce a bit of noise and can also result in flecks of brass being sprayed out from the drill, so remember to always wear eye and ear protection when operating power tools. There we have it, fully bored out for maximum gas flow. Now we're going to need to cut the tubing to length. So starting with our original spool of 6mm inner diameter, 8mm outer diameter nylon tubing, we're going to want to cut a 1 3/8 inch section. Now, normally it'll be in a big spool. I've just cut off a small part to illustrate. So to do this, all you have to do is just measure it out, align the right measurements, and then just cut at 1 3/8. Now, I'm just using a box cutter and a ruler here, but for the sake of getting it exact, I'm using something a little different. This is just a commercial cutter intended for hobbyists. And I've already got it set up for 1 3/8 cut distance, so I'm just going to feed this through. And there we go, exactly 1 3/8 inch of nylon tubing. Now before we can actually seat this in the shell, there's one more thing we need to do. Now because this tubing is normally sold in spools, we have a bit of a problem. It's taken a set, and as you can see, the tubing's nowhere near straight. There's an easy way to fix that. Just take some boiling water and drop it in. A couple of minutes, the heat will allow it to regain its original form, and it should straighten out. In fact, just a couple of seconds is all it took, and as you can see, the tubing is now perfectly straight. Now I'm going to take the tubing that I've already cut to length and the brass that I've already drilled out. I'm going to just seat the tubing in the brass. To keep it aligned and centered, I'm going to take an O-ring. Again, this is a 4mm inner diameter, 1mm thickness, and I'm going to stretch it over the nylon tubing, just like that. And I'm going to push it down, and then use my fingernails to just wedge the O-ring into the mouth of the casing until it's flush. Now I just press down on the tubing to ensure that it's fully seated in the base of the shell, and now I can glue it. I'm just going to run a line of superglue around the mouth of the casing. And now, since that's a completely excessive amount of glue, I'm just going to wipe off the excess. Alright, and now just need to let this dry, and once it dries, then it'll be ready to test. First I'll chrono test with one BB. To To load a single BB into the shell, I'm just going to push it into the tubing. Has very little resistance, and I'll just use an unjamming rod to push it all the way down. Since the BB is now being held in the base of the brass, rather than in the nose as in the conventional Wingun shells, and because this has a wider aperture on the base, we should get higher power than on the conventional Wingun shells when using a single BB. First, we'll test the stock Wingun shell in a stock Wingun revolver. About 430 FPS, which is typical for these. Now, we'll test with the shell we just loaded. Just shy of 500 FPS. As you can see, that's a considerable increase, as predicted. But that's not really the intent of this, so let me show you how you'd use it with multiple BBs. So now let's chrono with all 6. In this case, it's only shot about 164 FPS, which is not a lot. Now for CQB, the muzzle velocity might not really matter, but let's see what it does with fewer BBs. In this case, I'm loading up 3, and once I've got those in the shell, I'm going to use a jamming rod to force them down again. And now let's see what this does. And we get 320 FPS, bringing it well within most field limits, both for CQB and outdoor use, and giving you a tri-shot spread. As I said before, these shells will work in more than just the Wingun revolvers, so let's try it in an Umarex Single Action Army. Now this time, with the full 6 BBs, we're getting 240 FPS instead. So there's quite a bit more power going through this particular gun using the same shells. Lastly, we'll test on the newer Dan Wesson. Keep in mind that this is the full power version, not the low power one sold on some Airsoft websites. Again, we're going to be using 6.2 gram BBs. Well, as you can see, it's doing only 162 FPS, which is not a lot, but keep in mind that this has hop-up, so it has a little bit better range. Again, when you're using 3 BBs, you get considerably more power, of course at the cost of a little less of a spread. So it's up to you to decide how many you want to load them with. If you want to just have one shot for plinking in the backyard at maximum power, you can load a single BB. If you want an outdoors usable tri-shot spread, you can load 3. And if you really just want the maximum number of BBs and don't care about how powerful they shoot, then you can use the full 6 in CQB. I found it quite useful. You can check out some of my other videos and links in the description. As an addendum, if you're willing to open up these guns and work on them, it's not too difficult to increase the tension on the hammer spring, which will increase the muzzle velocity. This will allow you to use the full 6 BBs per shell while still having a more useful, longer range muzzle velocity, and still stay within field limits. That's all for this episode. If you give this a try, be sure to let us know how it goes in the comments. Thanks for watching.